When Jackson's estate eventually resumed active management of his business interests months later, the dispute with Ronaldo was reassessed in light of changed circumstances. The estate's priorities focused on preserving Jackson's musical legacy rather than engaging in peripheral trademark disputes, particularly one that had been moving toward amicable resolution. The estate had to make strategic decisions about which legal battles to continue and which to resolve, explained one entertainment lawyer familiar with the situation but not directly involved. With limited resources and many competing priorities, they had to focus on the issues most central to protecting and monetizing Jackson's core assets, his music catalog, master recordings, and direct merchandise lines. The Ronaldo dispute, while legitimate, fell into a category of secondary concerns that might consume significant resources without proportionate benefit to the estate. Additionally, the collaborative charitable event that had made the settlement particularly attractive was no longer possible in Jackson's absence. For Ronaldo, the context had also changed dramatically. With Jackson's tragic death, any continuation of the dispute would appear insensitive and possibly damage his image. His team proactively reached out to Jackson's estate with a respectful proposal to formally resolve the matter and express Ronaldo's admiration for Jackson's artistic legacy. In October 2009, representatives from Ronaldo's team met with the estate executors in Los Angeles. The footballer sent a personal letter expressing his respect for Jackson and suggesting that resolving their dispute positively would honor the direction they had been moving before Jackson's passing. "It was a genuinely heartfelt gesture," recalled one person present at the meeting. The letter wasn't about legal positioning. It reflected Ronaldo's sincere admiration for Jackson and his desire to find a resolution that would respect his legacy. In November 2009, a quiet settlement was reached, the terms of which remain confidential to this day. According to sources familiar with the agreement, Ronaldo made certain concessions regarding specific marketing language and imagery, while the Jackson estate acknowledged the distinctiveness of the CR7 brand within its proper context. The settlement included practical guidelines for Ronaldo's brand development to avoid specific elements that had been central to Jackson's image. These reportedly included limitations on certain poses, specific combinations of royal imagery and terminology, and particular aesthetic elements that had been strongly associated with Jackson. In exchange, the estate formally acknowledged Ronaldo's right to use sports-related royal terminology and certain general regal imagery in appropriate contexts. Most significantly, Ronaldo made a substantial donation to the Jackson family's chosen charitable foundation supporting children's arts education, a gesture that honored what would have been the collaborative project had Jackson lived. In the end, it was resolved with mutual respect, said one insider. Both sides recognized that there was room in the world for different kinds of kings, that greatness in music and greatness in sport could coexist without diminishing either legacy. In the years following the settlement, Ronaldo's CR7 brand expanded dramatically but in ways that appeared mindful of the agreement's boundaries. His marketing consistently emphasized his sports identity first, with royal imagery used in contexts specifically related to football achievements rather than in broader lifestyle positioning. When the brand expanded into areas like fashion and fragrance, the marketing took noticeably different visual approaches than those associated with Jackson. The Jackson estate, meanwhile, continued to vigorously protect the late star's intellectual property, pursuing numerous other trademark disputes but never revisiting the issues with Ronaldo, a tacit acknowledgement that the settlement had effectively addressed their legitimate concerns while respecting both parties' interests. The brief legal battle between Michael Jackson and Cristiano Ronaldo never became public knowledge during Jackson's lifetime. It was only years later, as documents related to Jackson's estate became part of various court proceedings, that hints of the dispute emerged, pieced together by entertainment and sports journalists from court records and background conversations with insiders. What makes this little-known episode particularly fascinating is how it illuminates the nature of global celebrity at a pivotal moment of transition. Jackson had risen to fame in an era when stardom was defined by album sales, television appearances, and carefully managed public personas. Ronaldo represented a new model of global icon, one whose fame was increasingly driven by social media, whose brand extended across multiple platforms and products, and whose connection with fans was more direct and immediate. They were two different generations of superstardom, observed celebrity brand expert Jitendra Sadev. Jackson had mastered the 20th century version, while Ronaldo was defining the 21st century version. The lawsuit represented a moment when these two models collided, before finding a way to coexist. Jackson's era had been characterized by more distinct boundaries between different domains of celebrity. Musicians, actors, athletes, and other entertainers operated in relatively separate spheres, each with their own media channels, fan communities, and commercial structures. By the time of his dispute with Ronaldo, these boundaries were rapidly eroding in a media landscape transformed by digital technology and globalization. Ronaldo embodied this new paradigm. Though primarily a footballer, his fame transcended sports in ways that would have been difficult to imagine for previous generations of athletes. His social media following eventually grew to hundreds of millions across multiple platforms, giving him direct access to an audience larger than the population of most countries. His brand expanded into fashion, technology, hospitality, and entertainment, territories previously dominated by traditional celebrities from those industries. The legal dispute between Jackson and Ronaldo captured this moment of transition, with Jackson's team essentially arguing for the maintenance of traditional boundaries between different celebrity spheres, while Ronaldo's rise represented the inevitable blurring of those distinctions in the 21st century. In retrospect, both sides can be seen as having legitimate positions. Jackson had indeed pioneered the use of royal imagery in pop culture branding and had invested heavily in protecting those associations over decades. His concern about brand dilution as Ronaldo expanded beyond sports into lifestyle and entertainment was not unfounded from a business perspective. Jackson's legal position was also strengthened by specific trademark registrations and a documented history of actively defending those trademarks against potential infringement, a key factor in intellectual property law, which typically requires rights holders to consistently protect their marks to maintain their validity. Equally valid was Ronaldo's position that his use of similar imagery and terminology was not an infringement but a natural extension of how exceptional athletes had long been described. The tradition of sports kings predated Jackson, from Pelé being called the King of Football in the 1960s to Richard Petty as the King of NASCAR racing. Ronaldo's team also had strong arguments regarding the distinct nature of their brand origins, derived from his initials and jersey number, the different primary market for their products, sports fans rather than music consumers, and the legitimate use of royal imagery in contexts specifically related to sporting achievement rather than entertainment. The resolution, cut short by Jackson's untimely death but ultimately settled respectfully, perhaps offered the wisest path forward, recognition that certain broad concepts like royalty and greatness cannot be exclusively owned in our culture, while still respecting the specific expressions and associations that individuals have cultivated around those concepts. The settlement acknowledged both the legitimate rights of established brands to protect their distinctive elements and the inevitable evolution of celebrity culture across traditional boundaries. It recognized both Jackson's pioneering role in developing the king imagery in entertainment and Ronaldo's right to carry forward the separate tradition of royal terminology in sports into the digital age. Today, Cristiano Ronaldo's CR7 brand has expanded into a global enterprise worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while Michael Jackson's estate has continued to generate enormous revenue from his musical catalog and associated rights. Both exist as complementary rather than competing legacies, each dominant in their respective spheres. Ronaldo has gone on to win multiple additional Ballon d'Or awards, set countless records, and establish himself as one of football's all-time greats. His CR7 brand has expanded globally while maintaining the distinctive positioning established in the wake of the settlement with Jackson's estate. The guardrails established in that agreement, while limiting in some respects, ultimately provided helpful guidance for building a brand identity that was authentically Ronaldo's rather than derivative of other cultural icons. Jackson's legacy, meanwhile, has experienced both challenges and remarkable resilience. While controversies have continued to surround aspects of his personal life, his musical and cultural impact remains undeniable. The estate has successfully leveraged his catalog and image through initiatives like the Michael Jackson 1 Cirque du Soleil show in Las Vegas, posthumous album releases, and licensing deals. The King of Pop branding has remained central to these efforts, its value preserved in part through the estate's vigilant protection of its distinctive elements, including the settlement with Ronaldo. In a touching epilogue to this story, Ronaldo has occasionally paid homage to Jackson in subtle ways throughout his career. During certain goal celebrations, keen observers have noted moments where Ronaldo has incorporated moves reminiscent of Jackson's legendary dancing. In a 2019 interview, when asked about his influences outside of football, Ronaldo mentioned Jackson among those he admired for perfecting their craft through endless practice and never accepting limitations. These acknowledgments suggest that despite their brief legal conflict, Ronaldo recognized in Jackson a kindred spirit, someone who had similarly risen from humble beginnings to global adoration through a combination of natural talent and relentless work ethic. In 2019, on the 10th anniversary of Jackson's death, Ronaldo posted another tribute on social media, sharing an image of Jackson performing and writing, 10 years without the King of Pop. Your legacy remains forever. The post made no mention of their legal history, but for those few insiders aware of the full story, it carried additional significance, a public acknowledgement of the King title that had once been at the center of their dispute, now offered as respect from one legend to another. The untold story of Jackson v. Ronaldo serves as a reminder that behind the carefully crafted public images of our cultural icons are complex business operations protecting valuable intellectual property, as well as human beings navigating the unprecedented pressures and privileges of global fame. It also demonstrates how conflicts that initially appear zero-sum can sometimes evolve into scenarios of mutual benefit when approached with creativity and respect. The dispute captured a moment of transition in celebrity culture, the passing of the torch from one generation's definition of global stardom to another's. Jackson, despite the personal and legal challenges of his later years, had defined what it meant to be a global entertainment icon for the late 20th century. Ronaldo, along with contemporaries like Beyoncé and social media pioneers, was redefining that concept for the digital age. Rather than ending in bitter litigation or public acrimony, their brief collision resolved into mutual respect and acknowledgement. The settlement they reached, and particularly the collaborative vision they had begun to develop before Jackson's death, suggested a more enlightened approach to intellectual property in the digital age, one that protects legitimate rights while allowing for evolution, one that recognizes both historical contribution and contemporary innovation, and one that seeks to expand possibilities through collaboration rather than constrain them through conflict. In the end, neither Jackson nor Ronaldo won their brief legal battle in any traditional sense. Instead, they found a path toward coexistence cut tragically short by Jackson's death but ultimately honored in the settlement that followed. Two kings, from different realms, had nearly gone to war over their crowns before recognizing there was glory enough for both. In 2009, Michael Jackson's attorneys knocked on the door of football's rising star, Cristiano Ronaldo. In their hands were documents for an unprecedented lawsuit filed by the King of Pop against the world's most popular footballer. The cause of action, allegations that the CR7 brand infringed on Jackson's commercial rights to his self-proclaimed King of Pop title. This was the beginning of an unexpected legal battle that would pit the music and sports worlds against each other, a war over popularity, ego, and trademark rights. If these kinds of stories catch your attention, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Where are you watching us from right now? Let us know in the comments below. On a crisp February morning in 2009, as Cristiano Ronaldo was enjoying his first season at Real Madrid following his record-breaking £80 million transfer from Manchester United, an unexpected visitor arrived at his Madrid mansion. A legal representative delivered papers informing the Portuguese superstar that Michael Jackson, the globally renowned King of Pop, was initiating legal proceedings against him for trademark infringement, brand dilution, and unfair competition. For Ronaldo, the news came as a complete shock. The 24-year-old footballer had been building his CR7 brand since his Manchester United days, referencing his initials and iconic jersey number. He had recently signed a series of major endorsement deals that would eventually evolve into his fashion lines, fragrances, and lifestyle products. Being served with legal papers by a music icon seemed surreal, worlds colliding in the most unexpected way. Cristiano couldn't believe it, recalled Jorge Mendes, Ronaldo's agent, years later in a rare interview about the dispute. He actually thought it was some kind of prank at first. Cristiano had enormous respect for Michael Jackson as an entertainer. The idea that they were somehow business rivals had never crossed his mind. The lawsuit, filed quietly in European and American courts, claimed that Ronaldo's growing use of royal imagery and terminology in his CR7 brand marketing, particularly phrases like football royalty, king of the pitch, and CR7 reigns, created consumer confusion with Jackson's well-established king of pop persona and related merchandise. The timing of the lawsuit was not accidental. Ronaldo had just completed a transformative year in his career and public profile. His 2008 Ballon d'Or win had officially established him as the world's best footballer. His transfer to Real Madrid had broken world records and dominated sports headlines globally. Most significantly for the case, his personal brand was rapidly expanding beyond sports into lifestyle territory. The same month the lawsuit was filed, Ronaldo had announced plans for CR7 branded underwear, denim, and fragrance lines that would be marketed with regal themes and imagery. This expansion beyond sports and into lifestyle branding represented a critical inflection point that triggered Jackson's legal concerns. As long as Ronaldo had remained purely a sports figure, their commercial domains remained distinct. But as CR7 began positioning itself as a global lifestyle brand with the footballer as a cultural icon transcending sports, the boundaries between their respective territories blurred. Jackson's legal team presented evidence of marketing materials where Ronaldo was depicted with crowns, thrones, and other regal imagery that they argued had been central to Jackson's brand identity for decades. They also claimed that as Ronaldo expanded beyond sports into entertainment and lifestyle branding, he was encroaching on Jackson's commercial territory. Their legal briefs included side-by-side comparisons of promotional materials. Jackson's iconic poses with arms outstretched while wearing military-inspired jackets with gold embroidery alongside recent CR7 advertisements showing Ronaldo in similar poses and attire. They highlighted Jackson's long-established practice of appearing with crown imagery and royal symbols, comparing it to new CR7 promotional content that featured Ronaldo amid similar iconography. "The pattern is unmistakable," stated one legal filing. Mr. Ronaldo's marketing team is deliberately appropriating visual language and symbolic elements that have been uniquely associated with our client for decades, creating confusion in the marketplace and diluting the unique brand Mr. Jackson has built since the 1980s. For Jackson, then 50 years old and preparing for his "This Is It" comeback tour, the lawsuit represented something deeply personal. According to those close to him, Jackson had watched with growing concern as Ronaldo's star had risen meteorically, with some media outlets beginning to refer to the footballer as the Michael Jackson of soccer, a global icon whose appeal transcended his field. Michael had spent decades building his image as entertainment royalty, explained one former Jackson associate who requested anonymity. The King of Pop wasn't just a nickname, it was a carefully cultivated brand identity that he had invested millions in protecting. When he saw Ronaldo using similar royal iconography and being described in similar terms, he felt he had to defend what he'd built. The lawsuit reflected Jackson's historical vigilance in protecting his brand and image. Throughout his career, Jackson had been extremely proactive in defending his intellectual property, filing numerous lawsuits against unauthorized use of his name, image, and creative works. He had successfully registered trademarks for various aspects of his persona, including specific poses, visual elements, and terminology associated with his performances and public image. In 2008, just before the Ronaldo dispute, Jackson's legal team had pursued action against several other entities using "king" terminology in the entertainment space, including a record label promoting an artist as the "king of urban pop" and a dance competition branding itself as "kings of pop culture." Most of these disputes were settled quickly out of court, with the defendants agreeing to modify their branding. From Jackson's perspective, the case was straightforward. he had been using royal imagery and the King moniker since the 1980s, had formally trademarked various aspects of this brand identity, and was simply protecting his intellectual property. His legal team argued that as Ronaldo's brand expanded into entertainment, fragrance, and fashion, areas beyond sports where Jackson had established commercial interests, the potential for consumer confusion increased. This is not about ego or attacking Mr. Ronaldo's accomplishments in his field, Jackson's attorneys stated in one filing. This is simply about ensuring that decades of brand building and consumer recognition are not diluted by another entity adopting confusingly similar imagery and positioning. There was also a financial dimension that gave urgency to Jackson's concerns. Despite his massive historical success, by 2009, Jackson was facing significant financial challenges. Years of extravagant spending, legal settlements, and declining record sales had left him in a precarious position, with hundreds of millions in debt and multiple creditors pressing for payment. The planned "This Is It" tour was intended partly to address these financial pressures, making the protection of his brand assets and commercial potential more critical than ever. However, from Ronaldo's perspective, the lawsuit seemed absurd and overreaching. His team quickly assembled a robust defense, arguing that royal terminology and imagery were common in sports, that CR7 had nothing to do with music or entertainment in its primary association, and that no reasonable consumer would confuse the footballer's brand with Jackson's musical empire. "It's like comparing apples and spaceships," one member of Ronaldo's legal team reportedly commented. "They operate in completely different worlds with entirely different consumer bases. Michael Jackson doesn't own the concept of being king of something." Ronaldo's defense also emphasized the long tradition in sports of using royal terminology to describe exceptional athletes. Their filing cited numerous historical examples. Pelé had been called the king of football since the 1960s, Richard Petty was known as the king in NASCAR, in hockey, Wayne Gretzky was the Great One, another royal reference. These precedents, they argued, established that royal terminology in sports existed independently from entertainment contexts and had its own distinct tradition and meaning. The defense further highlighted the specific origin of Ronaldo's CR7 brand, explaining that it derived from his initials and jersey number, a common practice in sports merchandising with no connection to music or entertainment conventions. They presented evidence that the CR7 logo and branding had been developed organically over years with no reference to or inspiration from Jackson's imagery. "Mr. Ronaldo has created his brand identity through his extraordinary accomplishments on the football pitch," their response stated. "Any royal imagery or terminology used in his marketing reflects his status in the world of sports, not any attempt to associate with or appropriate elements of Mr. Jackson's entertainment persona." Ronaldo's defense also highlighted the generational difference, suggesting that Jackson, whose commercial peak had been in the 1980s and early 1990s, might be feeling threatened by a new global icon whose appeal to younger audiences was surpassing his own. They painted the lawsuit as a desperate attempt by a fading star to remain relevant by attaching himself to a rising one. This characterization was unfair to Jackson, whose cultural impact remained immense despite his controversial personal life. Yet there was perhaps some truth to the idea that the lawsuit reflected anxiety about his place in the rapidly changing landscape of global celebrity, where social media was creating new kinds of fame that operated by different rules than those Jackson had mastered. Jackson had risen to fame in an era when celebrity was mediated through traditional channels, record companies, television networks, radio stations, and print media. His image and public narrative were carefully controlled through these intermediaries. Ronaldo, though only 24, was already navigating a new paradigm where direct communication with fans through social media was creating different kinds of star-fan relationships and commercial opportunities. As the legal proceedings moved forward behind closed doors, both sides began to recognize potential downsides to a protracted public battle. For Jackson, already battling health issues and focused on his upcoming tour, a lengthy trademark dispute would be a distraction at best and potentially damaging to his image at worst, particularly if it was perceived as an attack on a beloved sports figure. Jackson's advisors also raised concerns about how the case might be covered in the media. The entertainer had endured years of negative press coverage, particularly following his 2005 trial, in which he was acquitted of all charges. A legal battle with a popular young athlete could easily be framed as another example of Jackson's perceived eccentricity rather than a legitimate business dispute, regardless of the legal merits. For Ronaldo, the situation presented different risks. While he felt confident in his legal position, being in a public dispute with a music legend could complicate his carefully managed image and distract from his performances on the pitch. Additionally, as a longtime music fan, Ronaldo reportedly felt uncomfortable being portrayed as an adversary of an artist he had grown up admiring. Cristiano actually had several Michael Jackson songs on his pre-match playlist, revealed a former Manchester United teammate. He used to do Jackson-inspired celebrations after some goals. The whole situation was bizarre because in many ways, he saw himself as carrying on Jackson's legacy of global superstardom, not competing with it. This sentiment eventually created an opening for a more constructive dialogue. In April 2009, representatives from both sides met in London to explore the possibility of resolution. What began as a tense negotiation evolved into a surprisingly productive discussion about the nature of global celebrity in the 21st century and the challenges of brand protection across different domains of entertainment. The meeting was held in a private suite at Claridge's Hotel, with strict confidentiality agreements in place. Present were legal representatives from both teams, branding experts, and two key figures, Jackson's longtime attorney John Branca and Jorge Mendes, Ronaldo's agent. Neither Jackson nor Ronaldo attended in person, though both were reportedly briefed multiple times throughout the day-long session. During these discussions, Jackson's team gained a better understanding of how Ronaldo's brand positioning differed from Jackson's in key ways, despite some superficial similarities in the use of royal imagery. They recognized that the footballer's primary identity was firmly rooted in sports, even as his brand expanded into other areas. A turning point came when Ronaldo's team presented data showing that the CR7 brand's consumer base had minimal overlap with Jackson's fan demographic. While both men had global appeal, the purchasing patterns, age distributions, and primary interests of their respective audiences showed significant differences. This evidence suggested that the risk of actual market confusion was lower than Jackson's team had initially feared. Simultaneously, Ronaldo's representatives came to appreciate the legitimate concerns about brand dilution that motivated Jackson's lawsuit. They acknowledged that the "king" terminology and imagery were central to Jackson's brand identity and had been established decades before Ronaldo's rise to fame. It was like watching two planets initially on a collision course slowly adjust their orbits to move in parallel instead, described one lawyer who was present at the negotiations. Both sides began to see potential for coexistence rather than conflict. The breakthrough came when someone, accounts differ on whether it was John Branca or Jorge Mendes, suggested the possibility of collaboration rather than litigation. What if, instead of fighting over marketing territory, the two global icons found a way to combine their star power? This idea quickly gained traction. By May 2009, the framework of a settlement was taking shape. Ronaldo would modify certain aspects of his brand positioning to avoid the specific royal terminology that Jackson had trademarked, while Jackson would acknowledge Ronaldo's right to build his CR7 brand in ways that were distinct from Jackson's entertainment empire. The proposed settlement included specific guidelines. Ronaldo would refrain from using phrases that directly echoed Jackson's established branding, such as "king of" terminology in non-sports contexts. His team would also modify certain visual elements in CR7 marketing materials to create greater differentiation from Jackson's iconic imagery. In exchange, Jackson would formally acknowledge that the CR7 brand had legitimate rights to use sports-related royal terminology and imagery within its proper context. Most intriguingly, they began discussing a potential joint charitable initiative that would leverage both their platforms, perhaps a football match featuring celebrities from music and sports to raise money for children's causes, a passion both men shared despite their different backgrounds. This collaborative approach resonated with both sides for several reasons. Jackson had a long history of using his celebrity for humanitarian causes, from "We Are the World" to the Heal the World Foundation. Ronaldo, despite his young age, had already shown commitment to charitable work, particularly involving children's causes. A joint initiative would allow both to transform a potential conflict into a positive demonstration of their shared values. From a branding perspective, the collaboration offered elegant solutions to both sides' concerns. For Jackson, it would transform Ronaldo from a potential threat to his brand into a partner who implicitly acknowledged the senior status of Jackson's king imagery in the entertainment sphere. For Ronaldo, association with Jackson would provide implicit validation of his growing status as more than just a sports figure but a global cultural icon in his own right. It was evolving into a win-win scenario, said one source familiar with the negotiations. Rather than a zero-sum legal battle, they were creating something positive that could benefit both their brands while doing good in the world. Preliminary plans were drawn up for what would have been a spectacular event. A charity football match at Madrid's Santiago Bernabéu Stadium featuring teams captained by Ronaldo and Jackson, with players drawn from the worlds of football and music. Jackson would perform at halftime, possibly including a special number with Ronaldo participating. Merchandising for the event would be co-branded, with proceeds going to children's charities selected by both men. As momentum built around this concept, the legal teams began drafting a formal settlement agreement that would resolve the trademark dispute while establishing the framework for the charitable collaboration. Both Jackson and Ronaldo had reportedly expressed enthusiasm for the concept, with Jackson particularly engaged in brainstorming the creative aspects of the potential performance. But as plans for this collaboration were being finalized, tragedy struck. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died unexpectedly at the age of 50, just weeks before his planned comeback tour was to begin. The news shocked the world, including Ronaldo, who posted a tribute on his newly established social media accounts expressing sadness at the loss of a true legend and inspiration. The tribute was particularly poignant given the context of their ongoing legal dispute, which remained unknown to the public. In his message, Ronaldo wrote, "Michael Jackson showed us all what it means to be truly great, to break boundaries and unite people across all differences through art. His music was part of my life from childhood, and his example of excellence is something all of us in any field should aspire to. The world has lost a true icon." With Jackson's passing, the legal proceedings were automatically suspended as his estate took time to organize its affairs. The collaborative plans that had been in development were put on hold indefinitely, their potential never to be realized. The aftermath of Jackson's death created complex challenges for his estate. Led by executors John Branca and John McClane, the estate faced the immediate tasks of addressing Jackson's substantial debts, managing his assets, and protecting his legacy. The ongoing dispute with Ronaldo, which had been moving toward an amicable resolution, was just one of many legal matters requiring reassessment in light of dramatically changed circumstances. For several months, as the estate focused on more urgent matters, the Ronaldo case remained in limbo, legally active but practically dormant. During this period, Ronaldo's team took a deliberately respectful approach, making no public comment about the dispute and instructing their legal representatives to avoid any actions that might appear to be taking advantage of the situation.